Oh, it's so good to see all these wonderful faces. I miss you. And those of you I don't know, you look very interesting. Would be great to meet you someday in person. But for now, this is good enough for us all, I guess. It's spring, huh? You know, here in New York, it's a kind of rainy spring day. Uh, it's a tricky time, spring. It promises us sun, and gives us clouds. It offers blossoms and then pelts them down with the rain. Spring. Dogen wrote about spring. He wrote, spring, with all its numerous aspects, is called flowing. When spring flows, there is nothing outside of spring. Study this in detail. Spring invariably flows through spring, although flowing itself is not spring. Flowing occurs throughout spring. Thus, flowing is completed at just this moment of spring. Examine this carefully, coming and going. In your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds and thousands of eons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. Just that last line. If your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds and thousands and myriads of eons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. I wonder what each of you, in all the different places where you are, what you think of this flowing quality of spring. I wonder if it's like, you remember Chaucer, his description of the awakening of the desire to go on pilgrimage, the desire to be inspired by the spiritual path. Remember the prologue to the Canterbury Tales, which comes up for me every year at this time. When April, with its sweet showers, has pierced to the root the drought of March and bathed every vine in such liquor that virtue is produced as a flower, then folks long to go on pilgrimage. What a lovely thought, huh? That spring inspires us, uncovering in us its virtues, the positive qualities of life. And spring, says Chaucer, leads us to the spiritual path. Maybe your spring is more like T.S. Eliot's. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead land, mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Today we have spring rain here in Manhattan. What roots does it awaken in you? Is it Dogen's flowing spring, the spring that never stops flowing? Or maybe you might respond to Delmore Schwartz's lament on a park bench in Manhattan in 1937. Think of those years, 1937, the Depression, the poverty, the hunger. His poem is called Calmly We Walk Through This April's Day. Calmly we walk through this April's day, metropolitan poetry here and there. In the park sit the poor and the rich, screaming children's and a motor car fugitive about us. Between the worker and the millionaire, a number provides all distance. It is 1937 now. Many great dears are taken away. What will become of you and me? The poem goes on, and then 3 stanzas later, he ends the poem with these lines, reflecting on time and our relationship to our lives. Time is the school in which we learn. Time is the fire in which we burn. Time is the school in which we learn. Time is the fire in which we burn. I just have been struck by all these evocations of April, time, of the revolving seasons, the seasons when we live and when we die. These seasons can provoke in us an appreciation of our lives and the world we live in at this time. And there's something about April, something about spring that seems to call us to wake up to what's real, what is truly meaningful in our lives and in the lives of those we co-live with. I think it's the same flowing that Dogen is evoking. In your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds and thousands and myriads of aeons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. The key to that, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself, thinking that you are separate from all that is flowing around us right now, it creates a profound misunderstanding, a misunderstanding of the nature of life and death, that interconnected quality of our lives, and the concomitant responsibility that we all hold. I wonder how April reminds you of the flowing, of the interconnection. Is it Easter or Passover or a poem or a memory? Is it cherry blossoms, asparagus and ramps? Or maybe like me, April may also remind you of Dr. Martin Luther King, who was murdered on April 4th, 1968. 1 year after he gave a speech at Riverside Church that focused attention in this country on the relationship of greed and the wars this country fights at home and abroad. You know, he was supported at that speech. I mean, he was really attacked before that speech, but he was supported at that speech by the president of Riverside Church, John Bennett, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Other spiritual leaders stood up at that time. So to memory of him, I wanted to read you just a little bit of his speech. Here's what he said. Increasingly, by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of investment. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon cause us to question the fairness and justice of many of our past and present policies. On the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will only be an initial act. One day, we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard and superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. Dr. King spoke those words 53 years ago. What have we learned? Think of this country today. The racism, the immigrant scandals, the incarcerated, the poor, the aged. I think of Delmore Schwartz, time is the school in which we learn, time is the fire in which we burn. What have we learned? I think of Dogen's words about flowing. In your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself, and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds, thousands, and myriads of aeons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. Because each of us, right now, are in this flow. Right now, in this country that harbors anger and resentment, born of suffering and inequality, on so many levels, so many contours. It is daunting to even try to recognize. And these causes and conditions of the suffering may be age old, and some are new. But the response is called for now. And for those of us who practice in the Zen Buddhist tradition, a tradition that sprung from East Asia, it is particularly painful to realize and recognize the anti-Asian sentiment and violence that is occurring now, here, and is being exasperated at this time in this country. Of course, if we trace the history in this country over and over again, we'll see the oppression and exploitation of Asian immigrants, from the building of the railroads to the Asian Exclusion Act, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during the Second World War, the ghettoization of the Vietnamese and the Laotians who came during the Vietnam War. On and on and on. This month, our book club is reading Ocean Vuong's heartbreaking and brilliant novel, On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. He portrays the lives of his own Vietnamese family here in America, the struggles of suffering, the pain of immigration, the loss of language, the loss of recognition of culture, of a center that might hold. It's a heartbreaking book, beautifully written, and one that I think we all should read at this time. Because as Dogen says, if you don't think you're part of the flowing, you don't get it. So of course today, even with the rain, we will gather to walk in solidarity with our Asian American friends, our family. If you're able to walk, I hope you'll join us at Foley Square at 3 today and bring your umbrella. And if you can't walk, if you're at a distance or unable to do that today, we do have a Zoom group that will be meeting at 3 o'clock so that you can find that on our website and participate. So as we walk in person or in our hearts, I want you to remember, I hope that you can remember Dogen. You know, Dogen wrote this in what, 1247? Spring, with all its numerous aspects, is called flowing. When spring flows, there's nothing outside of spring. Study this in detail. Spring invariably flows through spring. Although flowing itself is not spring, flowing occurs throughout spring. Thus, flowing is completed at just this moment of spring. Examine this thoroughly, coming and going. And in your study of flowing, if you imagine the objective to be outside yourself, and that you flow and move through hundreds and thousands of worlds for hundreds and thousands of aeons, you have not devotedly studied the Buddha way. And again, I think of Delmore Schwartz's devastating lines. Time is the school in which we learn. Time is the fire in which we burn. I encourage us to be wise and responsible. And I offer you these last humble words. Even to ask what I can do begins the process. And I again join you as you and me, as we flow in this spring of the earth one more time. Thank you for joining me today.